Okay, so I'm here today with Professor Hansen, and he has a channel called Philosopher's Corner, and I'm going to post a link in the below bar. We're going to have a little bit of a dialogue, see if we can follow up some of the discussion that's been going on the tubes lately about free will and determinism. I guess how some of that relates to questions of the difference or relation or similarities between biological or natural evolution and cultural evolution. And so I guess, maybe just way to open the discussion there is if someone were to ask you, are there significant differences? What are the relations? I mean, how do you address the question of natural selection and evolution and that sort of the genetic information that's available there versus the kind of information that's available in cultural process? And, are those significantly different? What's your view on agency? What's your view on memes? To what extent are people free? Are they just caught in a deterministic universe? Does culture provide any of this freedom? Is culture just more determinism at a different level? I mean, how would you tackle any of those?
Well, I like to think that there is a little bit of freedom through culture and particularly through language. I've thought about this a lot, and I have to admit that every time I try to think about where exactly it is that we can sneak this freedom into this kind of not mechanical but mechanistic system, every time I think I've hit on it, this doesn't seem to be that it's not an accurate view. You think that we have the ability to make choices, and so we have alternatives that we can freely choose from. But then if you look at psychological explanations of what's going on here, they tell us that unconsciously or at the unconscious level, we're preparing to do certain kinds of these things before we're even conscious of it. So how can we say that we're freely choosing to do that?
Right. Okay. Well, let's get at that. So I want to take memory and imagination. Now, I think it's a non-controversial claim to suggest that memory and imagination are evolutionary functions that had survival value, and we can really understand the importance of memory and of imagination. But none of that really tells us what exactly is to be remembered, nor what exactly is to be imagined. And the degree to which certain kinds of communication technologies alter, change, amplify memory and imagination, it would seem that part of the problem is how nature was able to open itself to time through this odd organ we call the brain. So we call the brain this thing inside people, and then we say that it's this subjective thing, but it's really a complex way that time opened to itself. The new kinds of past and new kinds of future seem to become possible through this, again, conspiring of clocks, calendars, evolved brains that have memories and imagination and intersubjective communication and all those kinds of things. And so that we can anticipate futures together that seem to be very real. Like I've heard scientists say that, Andromeda's on a clash collision course with our galaxy, and hundreds of millions of years in the future, and this is a fact. Or we even talk about global climate change, and we seem to have awareness of things that we're going to say are more than subjective imagination. It's as if human communication capacities, language capacities, opened us to kinds of decision making or the experience of agency that's more than just an illusion. There is an actual agency, and it has to do with the way time opens to itself. Like, what are the ranges of the future to which language or the communication technologies can open, and how is that similar to or related to simple genetic information or biological inheritance?
And I think that the development of technology, particularly in the very beginning with the development of the stone tool, is something that clearly is a process or a task that we're taking on right at the time. With a view to the future. You're not going to use this stone tool right here. You're already imagining something, and of course, right. If you have to explain or if you eventually you will want to explain how to make the tool using more than just the visual imitation. So that will kind of stimulate language. But it's also, since it's involved, or we're dealing here with a process that is imagining something about the future, surely that has to come into play too, while you're, in a sense, bringing language into existence to be able to tell someone how to do this stone tool. You're also going to be telling them about the hunt that is coming, and so you're projecting a future right there.
Right. See, now, I think what happens is people say, well, the thag who's fashioning the stone tool there, and he's, teaching his child, he gets hit by lightning, and so all that imagined future wasn't real at all. And so because we do this kind of it's as if we introduce this context that shows what we're calling the future is a kind of speculation. Sometimes we use it under the context of it's a science, it's a fact. We talk about it like a fact about the collision course of Andromeda, or we talk about the ultimate heat death of the universe. We talk about these sort of eventual states due to entropy or whatnot, but it also seems like we're then quick to try to interrupt with possible So there seem to be some kinds of imagination that we're calling disclosures of ultimate futures that are not simply open to change. And yet the awareness of those, I don't know if it was determined. I think those were stochastic process. I think they were.
Oh, yeah.
Nature didn't choose to conspire those forces by which memory and imagination and feeling and intersubjectivity were going to produce this organism that would have guilt and freedom and all these kinds of things and choice. But we now suffer choice. I think that we do have agency and we do have choice, even though nature didn't choose us having choice. We're little pockets of self-legislation.
Yeah, and I think the idea of pre-adaptation is useful too. Our brains did not evolve specifically to do mathematics, but what they were evolved for allows us to do mathematics.
Right.
In a sense, if nature kind of is preparing at all, it's preparing with an open view. There's certainly no linear developmental process. We talk about that in iconology, the difference between visualizing evolution in a sense as linear as opposed to more tree-like and bush-like. Right. Really, it is more like that because when something occurs, it's not only capable of handling that particular situation, but pre-adaptively many other situations as well.
Yeah.
I
think the math one is such an interesting one. Okay, so Marianne Wolf's work, at Tufts, she's done all this work on brain physiology and shown pretty conclusively, I think, at least reasonably so, as much we want to say now, scientific research, is that you don't have genetic pre-endowment for literacy in the way that you do have it for the natural acquisition of language without any formal instruction. That is, you, without any formal instruction, if other people are around you and they're just talking to you and responding, and just what you're in interaction, you will acquire language. You don't have to be formally instructed. In the way that literacy, your brain kind of rewires and respecializes, reroutes nerves that previously were devoted to distant object recognition. And you have to beat the organism into the kind of submission that literacy is. It's a very precarious achievement. I think of Kierkegaard's work. Kierkegaard says, if by genetic improvement I advance a species of sheep, all subsequent sheep will express that gene and that improvement. But if an individual, through study and through personal growth and by encountering history and others, accomplishes a kind of selfhood, that the person takes with them in their grave. Does that get passed on to the subsequent generation, or isn't there a kind of forever habitual forgetting or loss? And then I think there's ambiguities. There are significant ambiguities there. Like in the math example, there are oddly some math prodigies who haven't been taught it, apparently. I mean, there are, it seems like it is very complicated. I mean, I don't know if it's an epigenetic phenomena that, math is, because the mathematical regularities of the world that produced this brain and that allowed this brain to recognize various forms and structures of those mathematical regularities, are they etched into the brain at some level? I mean, it's odd how you can account for some of the odd mathematical prodigies who really haven't had formal instruction in it.
Yes, really, and of course, if you think of the idiot savant, or what they used to call the idiot savant, where they have often those certain mathematical capacities when clearly they were not even in a position to be instructed in something like that.
Yeah.
And so clearly there's something about I think the brain itself, but clearly at the same time nobody believes that mathematics is stored in the brain. Or even like Plato, where it's really there, and you got to just everybody has it, and you just can draw it out of them.
Right.
Just in the sense that where Plato, you know everything before you're born.
Right.
When you're born.
Yeah. What's interesting is yeah. I mean, I think the mathematical savants oftentimes the numbers are meaningless. Do you know what I mean?
Some of them can even do it in terms of color, or they visual, or they experience numbers and mathematical ideas and relations in terms of almost perceptual objects sometimes.
Right. But I think for us, go ahead. But I mean, I think for us,
I can't remember what the text was that I read, but there was one specific example that was given in the text of this mathematical genius, in a sense, somebody who really experienced the numbers of different kinds of colors, even.
Right. But I mean, I think for us, your average everyday schmoes kind of on the street, we say today is December, or it's January 12th, 2012, and we have some notion of people are getting married next spring, and there's all of these kinds of plannings that are going on. Like right now, if you think of the amount of money that's being spent on people securing ballrooms in places 5 years from now, the conferences can plan and have, future planning conferences. They can be 2 or 3 years in advance. There's a whole World Summit organization that does 50-year planning, 100-year planning. When you start to think about these things like 100-year planning, now, is that real? Is this an exercise of agency? Is it not agency? I mean, to what extent is that? See, I want to go back for a second. Part of the argument that I was trying to give earlier was that of your past, the past that's now already past, it couldn't be otherwise than it is. That is, when you look back on your own personal past, if you pretend that you just as well could have done something else, you're really pretending you weren't there. No, you were there, and that's what you did. Now, but that doesn't mean that you don't have agency. It's not an argument for predestination, even though there is a sense in which it's like we're on this constant cusp of, sentencing ourselves to an irrevocable past. It's like the past. And now the meaning can change of it, and there can be forgiveness and reinterpretation, and there's sort of, hermeneutics is possible because there's repressed meanings, and again, it remains an open horizon, but the facts of the past, that's what it means to be the past, is it's a fact now. That's what we mean.
And that's in stark contrast to, I mean, when you're talking about the imaginings in the future and how they're, not real, I'm also thinking at the same time of the geometrical representation or interpretation of time as a fourth dimension of space, in a sense in terms of Einstein's theory of relativity, the future is actually already there and it's fixed, and it's almost as if you think of a cone and a plane moving through that cone, it's just the present is moving through this structure that's already in place. The past and the future as well. I mean, that's one of the implications of the general relativity.
Right.
And so they do often, and in fact, I even heard him say it on TV just the other day. Some scientists saying the future is already there. I mean, it's fixed, and
Well, the
And he was
future's
talking about
already,
it exactly as if it were the past,
yeah, well, the future's already there in the sense of an infinity of possible pasts, but they only exist as possible pasts. They're real as possible pasts. Why? Because we can think about them.
Yeah. Yeah, so what's the relationship between our thinking the real future and that real future that...
If we couldn't think about the possible pasts, we wouldn't have agency. It is exactly that imagination of memory, feeling, again, inner subjectivity, clocks, literacy, calendars, all conspiring together in just mundane everyday consciousness that, I guess, create a sense of agency because I can imagine what I might have for lunch next Thursday when dinner guests are going to come over. But, we could all get hit by lightning, get a bus, whatever, the bus accident, you start to look at all the...
There's a relationship there between, because when you say, clocks and calendars, what I'm thinking of is standardization. And of course, ritual is a type of standardizing, right? And when I create, and I hate to have to go back, when I create a stone tool, I'm actually, once I start understanding the process, or not in the sense of modern understanding, but being able to do the process. Sounds like somebody just came in the front door. When I'm able to do that process, I'm actually performing the ritual, which is kind of a standardized time.
Yeah. Well, I think the time issue is interesting because I think some people want to do this hard line, it's always now, as if the now makes room only for itself. They do this kind of stuff, like get in the now, get in the present. But then there are other people who want to go no, it's cyclical time. Can't you see it's seasonality and rhythm and rhythmicity and this kind of stuff? But yet the scientific view, I think, does more align with what we've been describing as some of the sources of our sense of agency, which are these senses in which we say, look, it's not as if there was, the earth rotating around the sun. It's actually the earth rotating around a sun which is rotating. That is, the earth and the sun have never been in the same spot. It is a linear progression. And that there are once only years. There is a unidirectional flow of the time. And so this capacity to reason about the future is no subjectivism. It's one of nature's most profound capacities to subject part of itself to self-capacity, self-legislation, and choice. Like somehow it experimented with, there's so much diversity and variety that part of life experimented with an organism that could experience an openness to time that would produce conditions for anxiety, for hope, for dread, for remorse, for forgiveness, all these kinds of emotions that only make sense given our temporal openness. See, I think we try to think of emotions as somehow part of our physiology, and they are, but the physiology are the organs by which nature is open to time. See, the question is, how real is time? Is time a psychological issue or is it an ontological problem? I've shot so many videos on this, and people accuse me of being psychological. They accuse me of giving a psychologism, and I'm saying, look, memory isn't simply a psychological issue. Once you accept a full-on naturalism, you have to now account for how nature evolved those organs by which possible pasts have become real.
Yeah, and so I'm almost seeing to me that, in a sense, technology, because I keep hitting back, because when I think of the physiological emergence of modern humans, I think in terms of the tools, the equipment, the things that were the manners by which we're actually changing nature in ways that other species haven't done that. So that technology, it really, it's clearly the door that opens to advanced culture because of the requirements of passing that. Like I say, if I know how to make a stone tool and I die, that knowledge is gone. And so if I don't pass it on to someone else,
Right.
And for me, culture is just that which can be taught.
Right. I mean,
You know,
Korzybski talked,
not necessarily that which can be learned, but that which can be taught. You know?
Right, right. I mean, Alfred Korzybski, who got so much flack for this around the early 1920s and 30s, and he came out and he said there are three kinds of organisms on the planet. One he called chemistry binders, and basically organisms, plant life, things that bind together chemicals in order for their own sustenance, photosynthesis, being largely the process. But then the next one is what he called space binders, and those were organisms which needed to rove space in order to gather the chemicals, and so they sort of emerged out. And the last he called time binders, and he suggested that humans were uniquely the time binders, and he said humans are not animals. Now, he wasn't denying, I mean, he was a scientist, and he was fully on board with all the scientific realm, but he wanted to suggest a certain kind of temporality. Now, I think by modern standards, we would say, look, there are elephants and dolphins and higher mammals, and our understanding of other organisms' capacities, I think, are much more sophisticated than maybe at his time. And he was he was a pioneer in neurophysiology, colloidal chemistry. Okay. I mean, a lot of the things that today are just understood as, meat and potatoes things at the time. He was very cutting edge. But I think I don't know, how do you get at this? There does seem to be, and it's largely because, as we said, these kind of communication technologies that we have socially, through purposeful intention, not through our genes, but through purposeful intention and willful handing on from one generation to the next, we've created a vulnerable ship that's in a kind of a temporal envelope of culture. It's not expressed in the genes. I mean, I think that's why we have feral children. I mean, that expression feral children some way registers what a person's like, sans the culture, historicity that culture gives.
Tradition, ideology, really. And it really, it reveals, in a sense, the animal that the human actually is, and what culture can do, right, for that particular animal. I mean, compare the feral child to someone of the same age who is, brought up normally. Now, they may not be taking full advantage of the opportunities they're given, but clearly they're in a totally different psychological world than the feral child.
Right, right.
And that's one thing I try to emphasize into my classes and stuff like that is we believe in the value of education, not just because you can know something else, but because it allows us to be persons in a particular way. Right. And, we don't necessarily want to live in a society where persons are being persons in a particular way and they're, mass murderers and so we do treasure, we value that education, which is, of course, the instilling of culture, because of, like I said, the different kind of persons it allows us to be. And really, in a sense, I guess I see now that, what kind of projected futures, imagined futures do feral children have?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how about this one? Is history real? I had this Tavakoli. I had him when I was getting my master's degree, and he was a historian. He taught historiography, and he came in, and the first day he went, as any good historian will tell you, all reality is the past. If it's not the past, it's not real, And I thought, boy, it's so funny, you don't hear a lot of people talking about it that way, but I think many people think the past or history is subjective, and they'll say, no, history is, again, a kind of an imagination, but it's odd that I think we again want to get at scientists who want to talk about dating of the planet, geographical or geological, things that predated us right here, right now.
Yeah. Geological dating timing.
Yeah, and it seems like that's more than subjective. That's we're doing something. We're registering time there, and it. How do you say it? I mean, I think all of these are part of the processes by which agency gets constructed. So it's the things that blindlessly had survival value did not get us in this, or they got us into this predicament, but the predicament itself is not being driven largely by those forces as much as by the cultural substrate that's driving it all in particular ways. I mean, this is sort of the feral child example, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, obviously, the fact that we have so many different cultures shows that we can enact that in so many different ways, right? And so...
So is the feral child free?
Free?
Yeah, does the feral child have a sense of agency?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's because if it's really the feral child is more animal-like than human-like, and if I consider animals in the sense of, sorry, I had to cat. Speaking of animals, from what I've been able to understand about animals after talking to you, I would almost want to say no. The feral child, it's kind of, to the extent that, because I do believe that for instance, in hunting, the animal can use imagination to project into the future to see what might be the possible outcome of this particular situation. But the distance to which they can extend that, is extremely limited.
Right.
And clearly the feral child might be in a position by comparing visual images or something like that to project a little, into the future, the possible future.
See, I always think of, some of this in terms of like Buddhist strategies, because I think sometimes Buddhist strategies would tell you, no, the past is illusion, future is illusion, self is illusion. There's really only a being present of, the larger unfolding of this moment now, that is sort of an ongoing sort of now. And it's, as much as I see that kind of insight, and I think some people try to align that with something like what they take to be animal forms of consciousness of some sort, again, it's this sort of return to a paradise that was pre-fall to language, or it's this sort of sense. It is odd that, or maybe I think there are resources in Stoicism where you don't have to fall into this pitting of either, be all worried about the impending future 50 years from now, or just hang out, be in the now, man. It's all an illusion. I think there's a realistic understanding of the harmony and order by which the gods, the fates, the factors that conspired to create this self-aware consciousness have put some things under your power and other things not under your power, like your breathing. I mean, it's only under your power to a certain extent, but it is to some extent under your power. And like the rest of your life, you don't have at any point complete control over all of it, but to say that you have no control over it, that's to precipitate in some of the breakdown of the control that you do have.
Yes, and I think that nicely illustrates that hierarchical structure that you were talking about in consciousness, because there's certain things that our brain is doing that we're not aware of, and if we try to be aware of it, we just kind of interfere, right? And so, but clearly there are other things that, in a sense, it's like these two systems where one is, in a sense, I mean, I don't think this is strictly speaking, but one is sort of an automatic physiological system, but this other one is kind of developed up on top of it that interacts with that, and I think that the interaction is where consciousness really comes from. They think, consciousness, they say that it's centered up here, but clearly it involves the whole brain and that whole response.
Oh, right, right.
And so I think that the fact that there are some things we have control of and some things that we don't or don't need to control illustrates that hierarchical structure, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. It's sort of like sometimes I think we purposefully constrain ourselves into putting below the level of conscious control what we want to really consciously control.
Yeah.
We engage in those strategies of rather than trying to prove how well, this is Daniel Dennett's example, rather than trying to prove how well we can drive our plane through a storm, we might circumvent the storm altogether and drive around. And that's the kind of freedom worth wanting. Freedom worth wanting has to do with larger senses of context, again, and this kind of recognition of those conditions. See, I think the people who are too quick to dismiss freedom and agency because they're trying to distance themselves from free will and religious dogma are doing a real disservice to a scientific orientation of what it is that sets humans or higher primates, whatever. I mean, what it is that sets certain parts of nature that we call ourselves right here in some way off. And again, we've already been going a half hour. I can see this discussion could go for a while, but maybe just, I don't know how to say it. I think that the issues are, again, so much larger than we could probably talk about. But what should we? What do you want to say by way of a closing? And maybe we can think more about it.
What I want to say is that the existence, in a sense, of these two different systems that I was talking about. One is kind of automatic, and the other is a little more free. And the relationship between them is what I like to call slipshod. It's like if you shoe a horse and it's not on there tight, there's play in it, or the play in the steering wheel. Now, in those situations, the play might be disadvantage, but the play in the relationship, the looseness between the relationship between the automatic system and the conscious, in a sense, of less automatic system, that looseness, I think, allows for a certain amount of freedom as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess some of that is sort of like it's analogic rather than digital. Digital has this either or kind of, it's step by step incremental and then gets choppy, whereas analogic has those values that they're infinitesimally adjustable, but they have fine grade,
Yeah, and you can apply the digital to, the way I see it, that automatic system, which either reacts or doesn't, but at the same time, it will have a certain analog aspect in a sense, or at least can borrow them, or, from the higher level, the consciousness, which is more analogical, of course, can be digitalized into words and things like that, too.
Right.
So it's that interplay of the analog and the digital. The wave and the particle, the self and the other.
Right. Well, I think it is. It's the hormonal system as it relates to the neurochemical. I mean, I think there really is. When we say that the body is a kind of computer, I think people can try to give that language, but let's try to get at what a analogic computing device really is like and how it relates to iconic as well as digital. I mean, it's a complicated, very, very complicated system. I think the computer is again a bad metaphor, partly because I don't think a computer has a future. I don't think a computer can have agency, because I think the best a computer can do is have sequences of now that play out in time. It doesn't literally imagine futures.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't imagine anything, right? It just, in a sense, processes. And I think it's kind of like, the brain, in the sense that it's just doing its thing, but it doesn't have that aspect of the brain where when my brain is doing its thing, I'm here.
See, I know that's so funny. Like, how can my brain always be in the process of doing now, whether I'm looking at a calendar that says today, tomorrow, or 3 weeks from now? So at the level of neurophysiology, those are all the same kind of data, but there's a qualia there that's radically different. It's understood and it's part of the context of social intelligibility, but I don't think you can find it at the neurochemical level.
No, and that's that. To me, that's one of the greatest and most interesting problems still facing this is how does that subjectivity emerge out of, and I think you go a long way, particularly phenomenologically, in helping us understand how that occurs. Right. But also, I want to understand the physiological, how does, so maybe that's something we could talk about.
Yeah. Well, Chet, thank you so much for making time. That was really fun. And I'll put a link down to your channel, and hopefully we'll get some people to shoot some response to this.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. You take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.